Las Vegas, Nevada. November 1968. The specific city that exists nowhere else on Earth, and could exist nowhere else on Earth, which is to say, a city built entirely on the proposition that the distance between what a man has and what a man wants can be closed by a single moment, a single card, a single number on a wheel, a single bet placed with the specific confidence of someone who believes that this time the outcome will be different from every previous time, which is the confidence that keeps the lights burning 24 hours a day in the desert, and that has kept them burning since the first casino opened its doors and discovered that the human appetite for that particular kind of hope is essentially without limit. The desert outside the city does not care about any of this. The desert is the desert. It was here before the lights, and it will be here after the lights, and it has never paused for a single moment of what happens inside the buildings at its edge. But inside the buildings, in November of 1968, the specific energy of a city that never sleeps and never closes, and never admits that the odds are always and permanently in the house's favor, moves through the corridors and the lobbies and the back rooms and the gyms in the way. That a current moves through water, invisibly and completely, and in every direction at once. The gym at the back of the Thunderbird Hotel is not the kind of gym that the guests of the Thunderbird Hotel use. The guests of the Thunderbird Hotel use the fitness room on the second floor with its clean equipment and its mirrors, and its particular smell of rubber and air conditioning that is the smell of every hotel fitness room in every hotel in America. In 1968, the gym at the back is something else. It is the gym that exists in the specific shadow of the hotel. The gym that the hotel acknowledges on no brochure and mentions to no guest, and that is reached by a corridor that runs behind the kitchen and through a door that is always unlocked, but never open in the sense of being welcoming, being open only in the mechanical sense of not being locked, which is a different kind of open entirely. It smells of leather and liniment, and the specific accumulated sweat of men who have been coming to this gym for years, and who have left something of themselves in the air of it each time they came and each time they left. The floor is wood, not polished, wood that has been used until it has become the color of use itself. A particular brown that is not the color the wood was born with, but the color it has been made by everything that has happened on top of it. The heavy bags hang from the ceiling on chains. The speed bag is in the corner. The ring is in the center. Canvas gray, from years of contact with the bodies of men who came here to prepare themselves for the specific violence of professional boxing, which is a violence that is not the same as other violence, because it has rules and referees and a bell that ends it and a crowd that pays to watch it, and yet is violence nonetheless. Is the deliberate application of force to another human body with the intention of damaging that body enough that it cannot continue, which is what it is regardless of the rules and the referees and the bell. Sonny Liston had been coming to this gym for 3 years. Not because he lived in Las Vegas, which he did, having moved here after the second fight with Ali, after the fight that ended in the way that the second fight with Ali ended, which is to say, in the way that still produced arguments in every gym and every bar and every boxing conversation in America in 1968, and would continue to produce those arguments for decades. The knockout in the first round, that some people had seen and some people had not seen, and that Liston himself discussed with the specific flat economy of a man who has made a decision about what he is willing to say about a thing, and will say exactly that, and nothing beyond it. He lived in Las Vegas because Las Vegas was the kind of city that did not require a man to have a particular kind of past in order to belong to it, that accepted the currency of presence and personality, and the specific weight that a man like Sonny Liston carried simply by walking into a room, which was considerable. He was 6 feet 1 inch and 215 pounds, and he had hands that had been measured at 15 inches in circumference, which is a measurement that boxing people repeated with the specific reverence that boxing people reserve for measurements that exceed what most people understand to be possible in a human body. His reach was 84 inches. His jab had been timed. The numbers that came back from the timing were numbers that the people who did the timing repeated carefully and with the specific caution of people reporting something they have witnessed, but that exceeds their framework for what is possible. He had been heavyweight champion of the world. He had taken the championship from Floyd Patterson in 1,962 inches, 2 minutes and 6 seconds of the first round, which was at that time the third fastest knockout in heavyweight championship history. He had defended the championship once, against Patterson again, in 4 seconds less than the first fight. He had lost the championship to Muhammad Ali in 1,964 inches, a fight that ended when Liston did not come out for the 7th round, citing a shoulder injury, which was the kind of ending that produced the kind of conversation that boxing conversations produce when the ending does not match the story that the crowd came to see. He had lost the rematch in the first round. And now, in November of 1968, he was 36 years old and still fighting, still training in the gym at the back of the Thunderbird Hotel, still the man who walked into rooms and reorganized the rooms simply by being in them. Still, the man with the 15-inch hands and the 84-inch reach and the jab that had been timed and the numbers reported carefully. He was in the gym on a Tuesday afternoon in November when the conversation started. There were 4 other men in the gym. His trainer, an older man named Willie, who had been in boxing for 40 years and who spoke rarely, and when he spoke said things that were worth the waiting for. 2 sparring partners, young men from the neighborhood who came to the gym 3 days a week and who had learned in the specific way that young men learn things in gyms like this one, that there is a difference between being hit by most people and being hit by Sonny Liston, and that the difference is not small. And a man named Garrett, who was not a boxer and had never been a boxer, but who had been coming to watch Liston train for 2 years, because Garrett was the kind of man who organized his life around proximity to power, and who had found in Sonny Liston a specific kind of power that he found worth being proximate to. Garrett was the one who started the conversation. He started it the way he started most conversations, which is by saying something he had read somewhere and presenting it as something he had thought himself, which was a habit that Willie had identified and privately noted and never mentioned because Willie did not spend words on things that were not his business. Garrett said that he had heard something interesting. He said that there was a Chinese man in Hollywood who was claiming that he was faster than any boxer alive. He said that this Chinese man was some kind of kung fu instructor who had been on television, had played a character on a show, and was now apparently telling people that his hands were faster than the hands of professional fighters, faster than the hands of champions, faster than hands that had been measured and timed by people who measured and timed hands professionally. He said that he had read an interview in which this Chinese man had said that he could touch a man's face before that man could blink, could complete a strike from a resting position faster than a trained fighter's reflexes could respond, could close the distance between intention and contact in a duration that no trained fighter could account for, because no trained fighter had been trained to account for something that arrived before the training had time to activate. Sonny Liston listened to this the way he listened to most things, which is without visible reaction and with the complete attention of someone who is taking in information and processing it in a place that is not available for observation. He worked the speed bag for 30 seconds after Garrett finished speaking. The sound of the speed bag in the gym was the sound it always was, which is the specific rapid percussion of leather against leather that in a boxing gym is as ordinary as breathing and as constant. Then he stopped. He turned to Garrett. He said, "What is this man's name?" Garrett said, "Bruce Lee." Liston said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I have not heard of him." Garrett said that was the point, that this man was not from boxing, was from a different world entirely, from the world of Chinese martial arts and Hollywood television, and was making claims about speed that boxing people were not taking seriously because boxing people did not take seriously claims made by people from outside boxing, particularly claims made by people who were as small as this particular man was reported to be. Garrett said he had seen a photograph. He said the man was perhaps 5 feet 7 inches and perhaps 135 pounds. Liston looked at Garrett for a moment, with the expression that Liston's face produced when it was receiving information that it found either amusing or contemptible. An expression that was the same for both responses, because Liston's face did not make many distinctions in the directions of its reactions. Then he said something that Willie heard from the corner where he was coiling rope, and that Willie would remember for the rest of his life, and that Garrett would repeat to everyone he knew for years, and that the two sparring partners would tell their children when their children were old enough to understand what it meant. He said, "Bring him here." He said, "I will stand still." He said, "I will put my hands behind my back." He said, "I will give him one free shot at my face, and if he touches me, I will give him $10,000 out of my own pocket, and if he does not touch me, he will tell every person he knows that Sonny Liston's face is unreachable by any human hand moving at any human speed." He said all of this in the flat, declarative tone of someone who is not making a boast, but stating a series of facts about the near future. The tone of someone for whom the outcome of the proposition is not in question, but who is willing to formalize the proposition, because formalizing it will make the outcome more useful, will make it into a story that travels, rather than a moment that stays in the gym. Willie coiled the rope and said nothing. The two sparring partners looked at each other. Garrett smiled the smile of a man who has just been given exactly what he came to get, which was something worth talking about. And somewhere in Hollywood, in a school on a side street that did not announce itself with signs and that had no listing in the telephone directory because its students came by way of knowing someone who already knew, a man who was not yet 30 years old and who was 5 feet 7 inches tall and who weighed 135 pounds was teaching a class in something that did not yet have a proper name, that he was calling Jeet Kune Do in the specific way that a man names something when the existing names do not contain it, when the thing he has built has gone past the edges of the categories that existed before he built it. His name was Bruce Lee. He did not know yet that his name had been spoken in a gym in Las Vegas. He would know soon. The phone call came through a mutual contact, a man who moved in the specific overlapping world where boxing and entertainment intersected in Los Angeles in 1968, where the people who made movies knew the people who made fights, and the people who made fights occasionally appeared in movies, and the two worlds touched at specific points, of which this mutual contact was one. The message was delivered to Bruce Lee on a Wednesday morning. He was in the middle of a training session when it arrived, and he finished the training session before he read the message, because Bruce Lee did not interrupt training sessions for messages, not because he lacked curiosity about the message, but because the training session was the training session, and the message would be what it was when the training session was finished. When he read the message, he read it twice. Then he folded it and placed it in his pocket, and continued with the rest of the morning, which was what he did with information that he had received and processed and decided what to do with, which was place it in the appropriate location and proceed. He called back that afternoon. The conversation was brief. The terms were as Liston had stated them. Liston would stand still, hands behind his back. One attempt. $10,000. If Bruce Lee made contact. The location was the gym at the back of the Thunderbird Hotel. The date was the following Saturday. Bruce Lee agreed to the terms in the specific way he agreed to things, which was without elaboration and without the performance of confidence that would have been its own kind of statement and that he had no interest in making. He said, Saturday. And the call was over. The word traveled the way word traveled in those intersecting worlds, which is quickly and in all directions, and with the specific acceleration that a story acquires when it contains elements that people find irresistible. And the elements of this story were irresistible in the specific way that only certain combinations of elements achieve, which is the combination of a famous name and an unknown name and a sum of money and a physical proposition that seemed to have an obvious outcome and that contained within it the specific possibility that the obvious outcome might not be the actual outcome, which is the possibility that makes people lean forward and pay attention and tell other people who tell other people. By Friday, there were people in Las Vegas who knew about Saturday, who had no connection to boxing or to Hollywood or to the mutual contact who had arranged it. By Saturday morning, there were 11 people in the gym at the back of the Thunderbird Hotel who had not been invited but who were there, who had found their way there through the specific social navigation of people who know someone, and who had decided that whatever was going to happen on Saturday morning in that gym was something they needed to be in the same room as. Sonny Liston arrived at 9 in the morning. He was wearing gray training clothes, and he moved through the gym to the center of the ring with the specific, unhurried authority of a man in his own space, which this gym was, which every gym Sonny Liston entered became simply by containing him. He did not acknowledge the 11 uninvited people arranged around the walls. He acknowledged Willie and he acknowledged his sparring partners, and he began to stretch with the focused economy of a man preparing his body for something. The deliberate attention to each muscle group that professional fighters bring to preparation, because professional fighters understand that the body is an instrument and that instruments require preparation and that preparation is not optional. He stretched for 20 minutes. He shadowboxed for 10. He was completely unhurried. The 11 people on the walls watched and said nothing because the room did not invite conversation, contained instead the specific quality of attention that precedes something, the held breath quality of a room that is waiting. Bruce Lee arrived at 9:35. He came through the back corridor door in dark training clothes, a jacket over a black t-shirt, moving through the doorway with the quality of movement that everyone who spent time around him eventually noticed and could not stop noticing, which was the quality of someone who had removed everything unnecessary from every motion, until what remained was only what the situation required, no more and nothing less. He was smaller than every person in the room except one of the sparring partners. He was smaller than the room expected, which is to say, the room had been told his measurements, and had heard his measurements, and had processed his measurements as information, and had nonetheless expected someone larger, because the story had the size of something larger, and the eye makes adjustments for stories, even when the measurements are known. He looked at the room with a calm, complete attention that was simply how he looked at things. He found Liston at the center of the ring. He looked at Liston for a moment, with a specific quality of someone reading something they are genuinely interested in. Then he nodded once and walked toward the ring. They stood across from each other with the ropes between them for a moment before Bruce Lee climbed through. At this distance, the size differential was not abstract. Liston was 6 feet 1 inch. Bruce Lee was 5 feet 7 inches. The 6 inches between those measurements was visible as a physical fact in the space between them. Liston's hands, 15 inches in circumference, hung at his sides with a specific weight of instruments that have been used for a long time and have acquired through use a quality of presence that hands without that history do not possess. Bruce Lee's hands were at his sides. They were not visibly remarkable. They were the hands of a lean young man in dark training clothes who had just walked into a gym in Las Vegas on a Saturday morning and who was about to attempt something that the room had already largely decided he could not do, had decided this on the basis of the measurements and the reputations and the specific logic of the proposition, which was that a man whose reflexes had been built by 30 years of professional boxing and whose face had been the target of the best fighters of his generation and had learned in the specific way that faces learn through being targeted, to move away from what was coming before. What was coming had fully arrived, was not a face that could be touched by a person who was not a boxer and who was 5 feet 7 inches and 135 pounds, regardless of what that person claimed about the speed of his hands. Liston climbed down from the ring. He stood on the gym floor. He placed his hands behind his back in the specific gesture of the proposition, the gesture that said he was fulfilling his terms, that his hands were removed from the equation, that what remained was simply his face, and the space between his face and Bruce Lee's hands, and whatever reflexes 30 years of professional boxing had deposited in his nervous system. His face was the face it always was. The expression it carried was not arrogance, and was not contempt, and was not the performance of confidence. It was something quieter than any of those things. It was the expression of a man who has made an accurate assessment of a situation based on the best available information, and who is now waiting for the situation to confirm the assessment. Bruce Lee stood in front of him. The distance between them was approximately 4 feet, which is a distance that seems sufficient that the eye and the nervous system and 30 years of professional boxing experience process as sufficient, because 4 feet is a distance that contains within it what appears to be enough time, enough space, enough distance for the signal to travel from the eye to the brain to the muscle, in the way that signals travel in a body that has been trained for 30 years to receive exactly this kind of signal and respond to it faster than untrained bodies respond. 4 feet felt like enough. 4 feet was not enough. What happened next lasted 0.3 seconds. This is not a description. This is the measurement that was taken afterward by a man in the room who had brought a device for timing things because he had been told something was going to happen that would be worth timing, and who had positioned himself and his device, and who afterward looked at what the device showed him and reported the number carefully and with a specific caution of someone reporting something they have witnessed, but that exceeds their framework for what they expected to witness. 0.3 seconds. In 0.3 seconds, Bruce Lee's right hand moved from its position at his side to a point of contact with Sonny Liston's left cheek and returned to its position at his side. This is what happened. The description of it takes longer than it took. The description of it takes approximately 4 seconds to read at normal reading speed, which is approximately 13 times longer than the event itself, which lasted 0.3 seconds. The 11 people on the walls saw it. Willie saw it. The sparring partners saw it. What they saw, and what they reported afterward, and what they spent the rest of that day, and the days that followed, trying to describe to people who had not been there, was not the hand moving, because the hand moving was not something that the eye caught in the way that the eye catches most movements, which is as a sequence of positions through space. What they saw was the before and the after. They saw Bruce Lee's hand at his side, and then they saw it back at his side. And the question of what had happened in the interval between those two positions was a question that the room spent the rest of the morning trying to answer. Sonny Liston's head moved, not dramatically, not in the way that heads move in boxing when something lands with the force of a professional punch. In the small, specific way that a head moves when something has made contact with it that was not supposed to be able to make contact with it. The involuntary small motion of something responding to contact. The motion that cannot be willed away or trained away, because it is below the level where will and training operate. It is in the body itself, in the tissue, in the specific mechanical response of mass to contact. His head moved, and his hands, which were behind his back, where he had placed them as part of the proposition, did not move. They stayed behind his back, because the signal that would have moved them, the signal that 30 years of professional boxing had made faster than the signals in most human nervous systems, had not completed its journey from his eye to his brain to his hands before the contact was made and withdrawn. The signal was still traveling when the thing it was supposed to respond to was already over. The room was silent for 4 seconds. Not the silence of people who have nothing to say, but the silence of people who have too much to say and are trying to locate the beginning of it, trying to find the place to start when what they have just witnessed does not fit inside the language they brought with them into the room. 4 seconds of the specific silence of 11 people, and Willie and 2 sparring partners standing in a gym in Las Vegas on a Saturday morning in November of 1968 with the desert outside doing what the desert always does, which is nothing. Being the desert. Being the thing that was here before all of this, and that will be here after. Sonny Liston raised his head. He looked at Bruce Lee with the expression that his face had never worn in any gym, in any city, in any year of his professional life. Which is to say, he looked at Bruce Lee with the expression of a man who has been somewhere he did not know it was possible to go, and has returned from it with the specific new knowledge of someone who has found the edge of what they understood and looked over it. He said nothing for a long moment. The room waited. Willie waited in the corner. The 11 people waited against the walls. The heavy bags hung from their chains without moving. Then, Sonny Liston reached into the pocket of his gray training jacket and removed an envelope. He held it out to Bruce Lee. Inside the envelope was $10,000 in cash, which was the amount that Liston had specified, and which Liston had brought in cash because Liston did things the way he said he would do them, had always done things the way he said he would do them, which was one of the things about Sonny Liston that the people who knew him knew, and that the people who did not know him did not know, because what they knew was the public story, and the public story was not all of the story. Bruce Lee took the envelope. He did not open it. He did not count it. He placed it in the pocket of his jacket with the same economy with which he did everything else. He looked at Liston. He said something that only Liston could hear, said it quietly in the space between them, and Liston listened and then nodded once, with the specific nod of someone receiving something true. Bruce Lee put on his jacket. He walked to the corridor door. He went through it. The door closed. The sound of his footsteps diminished down the corridor and was gone. Sonny Liston stood in the center of his gym for a long moment. He looked at his hands. He turned them over and looked at the palms, and then turned them back and looked at the knuckles, the 15-inch hands that had been the instrument of his entire life, that had carried him from the specific poverty of the Arkansas cotton fields where he was born to the heavyweight championship of the world, that had been measured and timed and photographed and written about, and that had not moved in time on a Saturday morning in November in Las Vegas, when 0.3 seconds was all the time there was, and 0.3 seconds was not. Enough. He looked at his hands for a long time. Then he walked to the heavy bag in the corner and began to work it. The sound of it filled the gym the way it always did. The 11 people on the walls began slowly to find their voices, began slowly to say to each other what they had seen, began the process of turning the event into the story that it would become, the story that would travel from that gym in Las Vegas into every boxing gym and every martial arts school and every conversation about speed and human possibility that touched it for the rest of the century and beyond. Willie watched Liston work the bag. He said nothing because he had said nothing all morning, and because what the morning contained did not require his words. He coiled his rope. The desert outside continued to be the desert. Las Vegas continued to be Las Vegas. And $10,000 rode in the pocket of a dark jacket through the back corridor of the Thunderbird Hotel and out into the Nevada morning, carried by a man who walked toward his car with the same economy and the same absence of performance with which he walked through every space, as if what had just happened was simply what the morning had required, and was now complete and deserved no further attention. The man who had timed it looked at his device one more time before he put it away. 0.3 seconds. He told 3 people that afternoon. Each of those people told 3 more. By the end of the week, the number had traveled further than he had. By the end of the month, it was in gyms he had never visited, in cities he had never been to. Not because the number was unbelievable, but because it was exactly believable enough